My HOA decided my perfectly functional, nature protective fence was ugly and had it ripped down, opening our community to a very real, very toothy threat. I warned them, I pleaded, but the HOA president, a woman I'll call Karen, just laughed. They had no idea my ugly fence was the only thing keeping us safe. How far would you go to protect your home when the very people meant to uphold community standards put everyone in danger? Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and buckle up, because this story gets wild. Man, I'm still buzzing from it all. It was a Monday, around 7:14 a.m., when my peaceful retirement turned into a full-blown war zone. All thanks to Karen. Now, Karen, bless her heart, or lack thereof, was the undisputed monarch of our homeowners association. You know the type, right? The one who bought a house a year ago and suddenly thinks she's descended from royalty, entitled to dictate the color of your petunias and the precise angle of your garden gnome's hat. She was a woman in her mid-50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a yacht club luncheon, even when she was just power walking around the neighborhood with a clipboard and an expression that screamed, "I will find something wrong." Her hair was always perfectly coiffed, a stiff, lacquered blonde helmet that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and her eyes. Oh, those eyes could strip paint from a wall, especially when she was eyeing a perceived infraction. She had this way of puffing out her chest when she spoke, as if her pronouncements were handed down from Mount Olympus itself. Her car, a gleaming white luxury SUV, was meticulously detailed every week, a stark contrast to the slightly weathered, lived-in feel of most of our homes. She'd moved into one of the newer, flashier houses in the development, the kind that had all the latest smart home gadgets but absolutely no character, which I suppose was a fitting reflection of its owner. I'd seen her glare at a kid's lemonade stand once, and I swear the lemon shriveled on the spot. She was truly a force of nature, if nature were a meticulously organized, slightly aggressive spreadsheet. When I first heard her name, Karen, it was like a cosmic punchline, a joke written into her very DNA. She must have been destined to have that name. Anyway, this Monday, the day it all started, I was out in my backyard, sipping my coffee and enjoying the quiet hum of the Florida morning. My backyard isn't just a patch of grass. It backs right up to a small, protected wetland preserve. It's beautiful, teeming with life, birds, turtles, the occasional deer, and, crucially, alligators, which is exactly why I had a fence. Not just any fence, mind you. This was a sturdy, chain-link fence, not exactly picturesque, but incredibly effective, standing tall for as long as I'd owned the place, a good 20 years, and even before that, I found out. It was a utilitarian fence, not something out of a magazine, but it did its job, keeping the wild out and the residents in. This fence, this humble, practical barrier, became the target of Karen's latest crusade. I'd had a few run-ins with her before, mostly about my lawn being too shaggy or my rosebush exceeding acceptable height regulations. Typical HOA nonsense. I usually just nodded, waited for her to leave, and did absolutely nothing. But this was different. This was my fence, my safe haven. At 7:30 a.m., a notice was slipped under my door. Not a pleasant little memo, but a stark white envelope, emblazoned with the HOA logo, feeling less like a community update and more like a court summons. Inside, typed in an unnecessarily large, bold font, was a formal complaint. Subject: Fence Aesthetics and Community Standards Violation. The letter, signed by Karen herself, stated that my fence was visually unappealing, detracted from the overall aesthetic of the community, and contributed to a perception of neglect. It demanded I remove and replace it with an approved HOA-compliant decorative vinyl fence within 30 days, or face escalating fines. Attached was a photo of my fence, digitally altered to look even rustier and more decrepit than it actually was, next to a glossy image of a pristine white vinyl fence from a catalog. Wow, this officer is unbelievable, I thought, looking at the official-looking document. It was pure Karen. The audacity. I remember scoffing, thinking, they can't be serious. This fence had been here for decades. It was a fixture. It was a necessity. I went to the HOA office that very afternoon, 1:45 p.m., expecting to have a rational conversation with someone, perhaps clarify the situation. I walked in, and there she was, Karen, holding court behind the main desk, not the administrative assistant. She saw me approach, and a thin, practiced smile stretched across her face, not quite reaching her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Henderson," she chirped, her voice a little too sweet. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Karen," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "I received a notice about my fence. There must be some mistake. That fence has been there forever. It's perfectly functional, and frankly, it's essential for keeping wildlife out." She raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Essential? Mr. Henderson, we are a modern, upscale community, not a wildlife preserve. While we appreciate nature, we must maintain a certain standard. Your fence, to put it mildly, is an eyesore. It looks like something from a junkyard, certainly not befitting the property values we strive to uphold." Her tone was dismissive, as if my concerns were the ramblings of a confused old man. She waved a hand vaguely. "We have a new initiative, Beautify Our Borders, designed to enhance the visual appeal of our community. Your fence is simply not up to par. It falls under the Permit 2022 Aesthetics Guideline, which was recently approved. This guideline, based on community feedback from last year's Vision for Tomorrow survey, clearly states that all boundary fencing visible from common areas must adhere to a pre-approved material and style. Your chain-link fence, a relic from what I can only assume was a very different era, unfortunately, does not. It was an absolute fine, a penalty for owning something practical. I felt a surge of anger. A relic? Karen, that fence protects my property, and frankly, the entire community, from what lives in that preserve. You can't just tear it down without understanding its purpose." I jostled towards the window, which offered a glimpse of the lush green wetlands. She chuckled, a short, sharp sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, please. A few harmless raccoons, perhaps? We're hardly in the Everglades. Our residents expect manicured lawns, not wildlife encounters in their backyards." The board voted unanimously. "The decision is final. You have 30 days. She then pointed to a framed certificate on the wall. Community Excellence Award, 2023, like it validated her entire existence. It was one of those hollow titles, a deed of self-importance. She looked at her watch, a delicate gold timepiece. It was 2:07 p.m. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another meeting." The implication was clear. You are wasting my time. I walked out of that office fuming. Unanimous vote? Community feedback? I'd never seen anything about a Vision for Tomorrow survey, nor a Beautify Our Borders initiative until that moment. It was all Karen's doing. I knew it. She wanted a pristine cookie-cutter community, and my old, reliable fence with its practical purpose stood in the way of her vision of manicured perfection. This was more than just a fence. It was a symbol of her control, her relentless pursuit of an aesthetic that completely ignored reality. It was a ticket, a violation, a deed of tyranny. I wasn't just mad. I was genuinely worried. That preserve wasn't full of harmless raccoons. It was full of apex predators, and Karen, in her ignorant arrogance, was about to invite them to dinner. This wasn't just about my ugly fence anymore. It was about public safety, about common sense versus bureaucratic tyranny. My journey for justice, and maybe a little bit of pro-revenge, had just begun. My blood was absolutely boiling. I went home that evening around 5:30 p.m. and immediately called my neighbor, Frank. Frank's a good man, about my age, maybe a year or two younger. He's lived here even longer than I have, seen several HOA regimes come and go. He's got that easygoing southern charm, but beneath it, he's sharp as a tack. He listened patiently as I recounted the whole infuriating exchange with Karen. "Chain link, huh?" He mused when I finished, a thoughtful pause on the line. "Yeah, I remember that fence. That thing's been there since before the development was even officially called Paradise Palms. It was a condition of the original platting, way back when it was just a few custom homes, before the big builders moved in. Something about wildlife mitigation, I think. Frank, always with the obscure historical facts. He even mentioned an old deed from 1998, which he vaguely remembered seeing. That was the first true flicker of hope I felt. The next day, Tuesday, I was on a mission. My initial anger had solidified into a cold, determined resolve. I wasn't just going to fight Corinne. I was going to dismantle her argument piece by piece, then watch her perfect little facade crumble. My first stop was the county records office, bright and early at a.m. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, but Frank's mention of original platting and wildlife mitigation gave me a starting point. I spent hours poring over dusty old property records, plat maps, and development agreements, feeling like an archaeologist unearthing ancient secrets. The woman at the counter, a pleasant but utterly unenthusiastic civil servant named Brenda, kept sighing dramatically every time I asked for another box of documents. She made it clear that a permit from 2005 for a fence wasn't something she was used to pulling up anymore. It felt like I was sifting through years of titles and deeds, each one holding a piece of the puzzle. Around 10:57 a.m., I hit pay dirt. Tucked away in a file labeled Paradise Palms Development, Environmental Impact Statements, 2000 to 2003, I found it. A binding agreement dated January 15, 2002, between the original developers and the county's Environmental Protection Division. It specifically mandated a Type 3 wildlife barrier fence along the entire western boundary of the development, bordering the wetland preserve. The purpose was explicitly stated: to prevent ingress of native predatory species, particularly alligator mississippiensis, into residential areas, ensuring public safety and maintaining ecological balance within the preserve. Attached were detailed specifications, including material, galvanized chain link, minimum height 6 feet, specific gauge wire, and a non-modification clause. It was a condition for the entire development permit, 2002 Yen V001. Any alteration without explicit county environmental approval would violate the original development agreement and could lead to significant fines and even revocation of certain development rights. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was a legally binding requirement. It was the original deed, the founding document, the title that gave my fence its true purpose. This wasn't merely an ugly fence. It was a protective shield enshrined in local law. Man, it was shocking to see it in black and white. I practically floated out of that office, clutching my stack of photocopies like they were gold. I immediately drove to the local office of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, arriving just before their 12 p.m. lunch break. I spoke with a wildlife biologist named Dr. Elena Ramirez. She was exactly what I needed, a no-nonsense expert with a deep understanding of local ecosystems. I showed her the documents, explaining Corinne's ridiculous demands. Dr. Ramirez's eyebrows practically shot off her forehead as she read through the environmental impact statement. "Are you serious?" she exclaimed, her voice low with disbelief. "They want to tear down a Type 3 barrier fence bordering a known alligator habitat? That's beyond negligent. That's outright dangerous. Especially with the population density around here. A fine of that nature, or just an incident, would be catastrophic." She confirmed everything. The wetland, though small, was an active habitat for alligators, some of them quite large. The barrier fence was not just a suggestion, but a critical safety measure, explicitly designed to prevent conflicts between humans and wildlife. Removing that fence, she explained, would be like putting out a dinner bell for curious gators. They're opportunistic predators. They see easy access. They'll take it, especially during breeding season or when food is scarce. And this time of year, with the warmer weather, they're much more active. She offered to provide an official letter of support and even testify if needed. She also informed me about a previous incident, a ticket from 2017 where a similar fence in another community was removed, leading to an immediate increase in alligator nuisance calls and requiring the FWC to relocate several large gators. The community had to pay massive fines for violating environmental regulations. Armed with this formidable ammunition, I decided my next move had to be strategic. I wasn't just going to wave these papers at Karen. I was going to hit her where it hurt, her perceived authority and her precious property values. I needed to inform the community, but subtly. I wasn't out to cause a panic. but to plant seeds of doubt about Karen's judgment. On Wednesday, I casually struck up conversations with a few other long-term residents, those who I knew would appreciate common sense over HOA dogma. I mentioned Karen's fence demolition plans, feigning a bit of bewilderment. Can you believe it? She says my fence is ugly and wants it gone. Never mind, it's been there for decades. I watched their reactions. Most were surprised. One woman, Mrs. Davies, who had lived here for 30 years, shook her head. That woman, she sighed, referring to Karen, is going to get us all into trouble. Frank, my trusted ally, was already spreading the word through his network of neighborhood old-timers. This was the slow, steady burn before the inferno. I also spent a significant portion of Wednesday evening, after 6 p.m., drafting a formal letter to the HOA board. Not just Karen, but the entire board. I meticulously outlined my findings, attaching copies of the county's environmental impact statement, the FWC's Type 3 barrier fence mandate, and the original development permit with its specific requirements from 2002. I included Dr. Ramirez's preliminary statement outlining the dangers. I didn't mince words, but I kept the tone professional, almost detached. My goal was to present irrefutable facts, not emotional pleas. I also included a warning. Any action taken to remove the fence without proper county and FWC authorization would be a direct violation of binding agreements, potentially leading to severe legal consequences for the HOA, including substantial fines and liability for any incidents resulting from the fence's removal. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested, to each board member individually. A registered letter delivered at 9:37 a.m. the following morning, Thursday. This wasn't a casual complaint. It was a legal warning, a formal challenge to Karen's authority, backed by years of legal deeds and environmental titles. The game, as they say, was officially afoot. Karen thought she was playing with a timid old man. She was about to find out she'd poked a sleeping alligator. Despite my meticulously crafted letter and the very real legal warnings it contained, Karen, in her infinite wisdom and bottomless well of hubris, pressed on. I got a terse email from her on Friday, 10:15 a.m., acknowledging receipt of my novel-length treatise. She dismissed my findings as frivolous attempts to circumvent community guidelines, claiming the board had consulted with private legal counsel, who assured them the 2002 environmental mandates were outdated or superseded. Superseded by what? Her personal decree? She concluded by reiterating the 30-day deadline and warning me that any further insubordination would result in an immediate imposition of fines, retroactive to the date of her initial notice. The audacity. It was almost comical if it weren't so infuriatingly dangerous. This was no longer a dispute. It was a full frontal assault on common sense. Her email was essentially a ticket for daring to question her. I spent that weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. each day, coordinating with my allies. Dr. Ramirez was appalled by Karen's dismissive response. Outdated? Superseded? That's not how environmental law works, Mr. Henderson. These are binding agreements. They don't just expire because someone finds them inconveniently ugly. She immediately escalated the matter internally within the FWC, flagging the HOA stated intent to demolish the fence as a potential violation. T-text. She promised to follow up directly with the county environmental department. Frank, meanwhile, was a buzzing hive of activity. He confirmed that Karen had indeed hired a small-time lawyer known for handling minor HOA disputes, probably someone who just rubber-stamped whatever Karen wanted, without truly delving into the complexities of environmental law. Dude, Frank said to me over the phone, his voice a low growl. She's walking right into a trap, isn't she? I just chuckled darkly. Let's just say she's underestimating the size of the teeth in that trap, Frank. The 30-day deadline approached with an ominous inevitability. On the morning of Tuesday, 8:34 a.m., exactly 1 month after I received Karen's initial notice, a crew arrived. A flatbed truck with a cherry picker, several burly men in hard hats, and, of course, Karen herself, supervising the operation from the safety of her gleaming white SUV. She wore a pristine white linen suit, a vision of misguided managerial triumph. She had that smug, self-satisfied look on her face, like she was personally ushering in a new era of aesthetic perfection. The equipment had a permit-number-HOA-Demo 2024 sticker on it, a clear sign that this was authorized by the HOA, but not necessarily by any legitimate authority beyond that. I stood there, watching, a knot of dread and fury tightening in my stomach. I'd made a strategic decision not to physically intervene. That would just play into her narrative of me being a difficult, uncooperative resident. No, I was going to let her dig her own grave. But I wasn't just standing idle. My security cameras, positioned discreetly around my property, were recording everything. Every cut of the chain link, every clang of metal, every triumphant gesture from Corinne. I even had a small drone, usually used for surveying my garden, hovering discreetly high above, capturing a wider aerial shot of the entire demolition. This was more than just raw footage. It was irrefutable evidence, a digital deed of their destructive actions. The sounds of metal being torn, the grunts of the workers, the low hum of the cherry picker. It was a symphony of destruction. At 10:30 a.m., with a final sickening crunch, the last section of my sturdy, crocodile-deterring fence came crashing down. Where a protective barrier had stood for decades, there was now nothing but a gaping, ugly scar on the landscape, a direct, unobstructed pathway from the wild wetland to my backyard, and indeed, to the entire community. Corinne, oblivious to the monstrous implications of her actions, actually clapped. She actually clapped. I swear, my blood ran cold. The sheer ignorance, the reckless disregard for safety, it was breathtaking. This felt like a deliberate act, a punitive fine against my common sense. The very next day, Wednesday, the immediate consequences began. It was just 7 a.m., and I was out with my morning coffee, surveying the barren expanse where my fence once stood when I heard it. A low, guttural hiss. My heart leaped into my throat. There, at the edge of my newly exposed yard, partially hidden in the tall grass, was a young alligator. Maybe 4 feet long, but unmistakably an alligator. It was just basking, perfectly at home, no longer deterred by a barrier. I froze. I watched as it slowly, deliberately, turned its head, its beady eyes fixing on me. It felt like a direct consequence, a ticket for the HOA's folly. I quickly but calmly retreated back into the safety of my screened-in porch, grabbing my phone. I managed to snap a few clear photos and a short video of the gator before it lazily slipped back into the water at 7:15 a.m. This was my first piece of tangible, visual evidence of Corinne's folly. Later that afternoon, around 3:45 p.m., Frank called, his voice laced with concern. "Dude, you're not going to believe this. Mrs. Jenkins down the street just called me, practically in hysterics. She said she saw a larger one, closer to 5 or 6 feet, crossing her lawn, heading towards the community pool. The community pool where kids swam, where people sunbathed." My stomach clenched. This wasn't just my problem anymore. It was rapidly becoming everyone's. News traveled fast, not through Corinne's official HOA channels, but through the grassroots network of concerned residents. By Thursday morning, there were multiple reports. A small gator spotted near the playground at 8 a.m. Another seen swimming in the retention pond closer to the main entrance at 11:20 a.m., a pond that had never seen a gator before. Panic started to ripple through the neighborhood. Parents kept their kids indoors. Pet owners were terrified to let their dogs out. The atmosphere had shifted from one of serene suburban tranquility to palpable anxiety. People were looking over their shoulders, scanning the edges of their yards, nervous about every rustle in the bushes. Corinne, predictably, tried to downplay it. An email went out from the HOA around 1 p.m. on Thursday, titled "Reassurance Regarding Local Wildlife." It stated, in saccharine tones, that occasional sightings of local fauna are a natural part of living in beautiful Florida, and reminded residents not to feed the animals. There was no mention of the fence, no acknowledgement of the sudden increase in sightings, just a tone-deaf dismissal. It was a whitewash, a flimsy veil over a rapidly developing crisis. She might as well have called it a fine for being worried. She attached an old title of a pamphlet about Florida wildlife, as if that would make the Crocs disappear. This was the tipping point. My personal grievance had become a genuine community crisis, directly attributable to Karen's arrogant decision. I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't about petty revenge anymore. It was about public safety, about holding the powerful accountable, and about restoring common sense to our community. The stage was set for a public reckoning. My rage, initially hot and sputtering, had now settled into a cold, calculated fury. I was going to leverage every piece of evidence, every expert opinion, and every frightened resident to bring Karen's reign of error to a definitive, humiliating end. This was going to be a masterpiece of pro-revenge, a detailed takedown exposed years in the making. The satisfaction I anticipated from this justice narrative was already starting to form. The stage was set, and the players were in position. My rage, initially a fiery inferno, had cooled into a focused, laser-sharp determination. This wasn't just about my fence anymore. It was about exposing an entitled bully and restoring safety to an entire community. My methodical counteroffensive began in earnest on Friday, 9 a.m. My first call was to Dr. Elena Ramirez at the FWC. I recounted the escalating gator sightings, complete with my photos and Frank's reports. She was livid. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice tight with professional outrage, "this is exactly what we feared. This is beyond irresponsible. The HOA's actions are in direct violation of state environmental statutes and the original development permits. We're dispatching a field team to your area immediately to assess the situation and, if necessary, remove any nuisance alligators. We'll also be issuing a formal notice of violation to the HOA." She stressed the urgency, noting that any alligator over 4 feet could be considered a nuisance if found in a residential area and potentially dangerous. The incident was quickly logged, with a ticket number 2024-AL007, marking it as an official problem. Next, I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, specializing in property and environmental law. I'd had her on standby since Karen first issued her ridiculous ultimatum. I laid out the entire timeline. The initial notice, my detailed warning letter with all the supporting documents, Karen's dismissal, the demolition, and now the escalating alligator sightings. I sent her all my accumulated evidence. The county's environmental impact statement with its original permit date of 2002, the FWC's Type 3 barrier fence mandate, Karen's dismissive email, my security camera footage of the demolition, my drone footage, and the photos, videos of the alligators on my property, and Frank's witness reports. Sarah was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Mr. Henderson," she finally said, her voice grim, "this is a textbook case of gross negligence, reckless endangerment, and willful disregard for binding legal agreements. The HOA, specifically its president, is in serious legal jeopardy. We have everything we need to file for an injunction, demand immediate fence reconstruction, and pursue damages for the emotional distress and devaluation of property values. Beyond that, the FWC and the county will likely be imposing significant fines and potentially even criminal charges for environmental violations." She specifically highlighted the deed of violation that the HOA had signed with its own demolition. While Sarah began drafting legal documents, I focused on galvanizing the community. I couldn't just tell them. I had to show them. On Saturday, 7:30 p.m., I hosted a discreet meeting at Frank's house. About 15 concerned residents attended, including Mrs. Davies, the woman who had lived here for 30 years, and a few younger families with small children who were particularly terrified by the gator sightings. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I played the security footage of the fence demolition, then the stark contrast of the alligators casually wandering into our now vulnerable community. I showed them the official county documents, the FWC mandates, and Dr. Ramirez's statement. I explained, in simple terms, the legal ramifications Karen and the HOA faced. "This isn't just about my ugly fence," I stressed. "This is about our safety, our property values, and holding accountable those who put their ego above our well-being." Karen claimed a permit from 2024 for demolition, but she ignored the true title of Safety and Environment from 2002. The mood in the room shifted from fear to a potent blend of anger and righteous indignation. "Man, this is unbelievable," exclaimed one young father, running a hand through his hair. "My kids can't even play outside anymore." Mrs. Davies chimed in. "I always knew that Karen was trouble. She tried to find me last year, a fine 2023 lawn, because my petunias were too purple for her taste. This is far worse." They were united. We formed a small residents' action group, agreeing to present a united front. We decided to create a petition demanding Karen's immediate resignation and the reconstruction of the fence, all at the HOA's expense. By Monday, 9 a.m., Sarah had filed the necessary legal documents, an emergency injunction to halt any further alterations to the property line, and a civil lawsuit against the HOA for negligence and reckless endangerment. She also sent a formal notification to the entire HOA board, detailing the FWC and county's involvement. This wasn't just a letter. It was a legal bombshell. It listed the relevant statutes, the specific environmental permit numbers from 2002, and the potential penalties, including a massive fine from 2024 that could bankrupt the HOA. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. Karen, confident in her perceived power, probably thought it would be another routine meeting, another opportunity to dismiss my concerns. She had likely informed the other board members that my legal actions were baseless, just the ramblings of a disgruntled old man. She probably saw it as just another ticket she could dismiss. Oh, how wrong she was. That Wednesday, the community clubhouse was packed. Far more people than usually attended HOA meetings. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder, a sea of worried, angry faces. Karen, at the head of the table, looked slightly flustered by the turnout, but quickly composed herself, putting on her usual imperious mask. She started the meeting with a perfunctory review of budget items, totally ignoring the elephant, or should I say, alligator, in the room. When it came time for new business around 7:45 p.m., I stood up. I held my copies of the county documents, the FWC mandate, and photos of the alligators. "Madam President," I began, my voice clear and steady, "I believe we have a pressing issue concerning community safety that needs immediate attention." Karen, clearly annoyed, gave me a tight smile. "Mr. Henderson, we've already addressed your fence. It was an aesthetic decision, final and binding. No need to rehash old debates." The other board members, her enablers, nodded in agreement, their faces carefully neutral. They had clearly decided to back her, fearing her wrath more than my facts. They probably thought this was just another fine she'd levy on me. "With all due respect, Karen," I countered, deliberately using her first name, "this is not about aesthetics. It's about a legally mandated wildlife barrier fence, put in place as a condition of this community's very existence, specifically to keep alligators out. A mandate which you, in your infinite wisdom, chose to ignore and demolish." I then projected the security camera footage of the demolition onto the large screen at the front of the room. The sight of my fence being torn down, followed by the drone footage of the open expanse, drew gasps from the audience. Then I put up the photos and videos of the alligators, the young one in my yard, the larger one near Mrs. Jenkins's lawn, the one by the community pond. The collective gasp in the room was almost deafening. A few parents instinctively pulled their children closer. "This," I announced, pointing at the screen, "is a direct consequence of the HOA's reckless actions. Specifically, Madam President, your decision to tear down a critical safety barrier against the advice, and indeed the law, of this county and state." I then presented the certified letters from the FWC, detailing their notice of violation against the HOA and the county's environmental department, stating their intent to review the HOA's original development permits from 2002 for noncompliance. I finished with Sarah Chun's legal filing, projected onto the screen, the emergency injunction, and the civil lawsuit. The wording was stark, detailing potential fines, liabilities, and the possibility of criminal charges for endangering public safety. "This isn't a suggestion, Karen," I concluded, my voice now laced with triumphant steel. "This is the law. And the consequences, as you can now plainly see, are very, very real." The clubhouse erupted. Residents were shouting, demanding answers, demanding resignations. The narrative had flipped completely. Karen's carefully constructed facade of authority crumbled visibly. Her face, usually so composed, went pale, then mottled with splotches of red. Her eyes darted wildly, from me to the angry crowd, to her increasingly uncomfortable board members. One board member, Mr. Peterson, who had always seemed a bit more reasonable than the others, cleared his throat nervously. "Karen," he began, his voice barely audible, "Mr. Henderson presented us with these documents weeks ago. Why were we not informed of the true legal implications?" Karen spluttered, "These are baseless accusations. An old man's delusions." My lawyer said, but she was cut off by a torrent of angry voices. "Baseless? There's a gator by the pool," someone yelled. "My kids can't play outside," shouted another. "Our property values are going to plummet because of your stupidity," came from a third. The mob, once intimidated, was now fully unleashed. They had the title of their anger, and it was signed by injustice. This wasn't just a fine. It was a total penalty for Karen. The final nail in Karen's coffin came from Dr. Ramirez herself. She had been informed of the meeting, and seeing the overwhelming public safety risk, decided to make an appearance. She walked in around 8:30 p.m., uniformed and official, commanding immediate silence. She confirmed every detail I had presented, explaining the severe penalties the HOA faced, including mandated reconstruction of the fence at significant cost, hefty fines from the FWC and county, and potential personal liability for individual board members who knowingly approved the demolition. She showed an official permit from 2002, proving the fence's original purpose. She even mentioned the fine levied in 2017 against another community for a similar infraction. She concluded, "The HOS actions here are not only irresponsible, but criminally negligent. We've already initiated efforts to trap and remove the nuisance alligators that have entered the community, a cost that will also be levied against the HOA." Karen finally broke. Her face crumpled, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to deflate along with her ego. She whimpered something about not knowing, and just trying to help the community's appearance. The other board members, seeing the writing on the wall, quickly distanced themselves from her, with Mr. Peterson publicly stating, "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current president and a motion to temporarily suspend all HOA activities until this legal and safety crisis is resolved." The motion passed unanimously, save for Karen, who was too stunned to vote. Her reign, built on a foundation of arbitrary rules and unchecked arrogance, had come to a spectacular, humiliating end. Her title as HOA president was revoked. The satisfaction, I tell you, was sweeter than any dessert. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within days, Karen resigned from the HOA board, not just from the presidency, but entirely, claiming personal health reasons, which everyone knew was code for utter and complete public humiliation. Her white luxury SUV was seen less and less, and soon it was gone for good. She actually moved out of the community a month later. The remaining board members, humbled and terrified of the legal repercussions, swiftly agreed to all our demands. Sarah Chen negotiated a settlement that required the HOA to immediately rebuild the Type 3 wildlife barrier fence, this time with even higher specifications, fully compliant with all FWC and county mandates, and at the HOA's sole expense. They also had to cover all my legal fees and those of the FWC's alligator removal operations. A new board was elected, comprised of sensible, community-focused residents. Frank even joined, much to my amusement. The atmosphere in Paradise Palms transformed almost overnight. The fear subsided, replaced by a renewed sense of community and safety. The property values, which had taken a hit during the alligator crisis, began to recover. My fence, a new, even sturdier version, was rebuilt within weeks, a symbol not of ugliness, but of protection and the triumph of common sense. I often sit on my porch now, sipping my coffee, watching the rebuilt fence stand sentinel against the wetlands, secure in the knowledge that justice, in its most satisfying, alligator-driven form, had been served. It was a victory not just for me, but for everyone who believed that practical safety should always trump petty aesthetics. This whole ordeal was a testament to the power of one person, armed with facts and a little strategic patience, to bring down an entrenched, arrogant system. And that, my friends, is a story worth telling. And that, my friends, is why you never underestimate an old man and his ugly fence.